Welcome to the Vaxa Intelligence Optimised podcast. As with our entire ecosystem, this series has been designed to add additional insights from our SITREP series, providing our clients with a competitive edge in an ever-changing, volatile region through access to a living library of regional experts across national security, energy, supply chain, food and agribusiness, technology and the infrastructure domains. Today we have a panel of 4 experts. Paddy Hallinan is Vaxa's Strategic Engagement and Planning Lead with over 30 years experience as a Senior Australian Army Officer and currency in the Indo-Pacific planning and preparation realm. Matt Ort is the Managing Director of Vaxa United States. A recently retired United States Naval Commander, Matt's last posting was as the US Naval Attache to Australia. Matt was integral in the design of the AUKUS program. Ray Powell is the Director of Sealight and former US Air Force Colonel with experience as the US Defence Attache to Australia and Vietnam. Ray specialises in the competitive space, which is the South China Sea. And Pete McChrystal is Vaxa's Chief Explainer in Residence, a Network Architect Associate. Ideating and delivering emerging technologies, Pete has delivered programs of significance the Australian Government and communications giants such as Telstra. Today, we'll be exploring unified networking and collaboration amongst allied partners, or if I had to sum it up in one word, communication. But before we get started, if you enjoy this content, please subscribe on your favourite podcasting platform. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. What we're going to be talking about is a topic that obviously you all have a lot of experience in various ways, shapes and forms, and it's around networking. And today we're going to delve into the importance of unified networking and emphasising how crucial collaboration is amongst partners and allies in the region. We're going to explore the technical solutions required for such a network and the challenges associated with the information sharing arrangements, referencing the complexities of Five Eyes versus other bilateral arrangements. And we're going to focus on inherent challenges in creating a cohesive, collaborative environment in defence and intelligent sharing. So, gents, Paddy, I think what we're going to start with here is, the integration of allies and partners in battle networks.
Well, I think we talked about networking during your introduction there, but I think what we're talking about is the requirement to network and accept, I think, that we find ourselves in the geostrategic circumstances where networking, collaboration are much more at the forefront than they were in the past. And that brings us into this world of complexity in the Indo-Pacific region, which is where we're focusing on today's discussion. Where there's a complex web of networks in place, treaties, alliances and so forth, which require some sort of careful navigation now to deal with the complexities, as I said earlier, that we're faced with. China's growing influence within the region and its expansionism and how it's gone about that business, and what that means to countries such as ourselves, to the United States and other nations in the region. How we combat that situation is the challenge for us all. But what it talks to in many respects is how we are going to engage, collaborate and work together to meet and satisfy our respective national and common goals, I guess, throughout that. But for me, that's broadly the subject, and there's a number of rabbit holes I'm sure we'll go down when we talk about that today.
Yeah, lovely. And speaking of the region, Ray, the last little while you've really been focusing on the South China Sea and interoperations between not only the US, Australia, but also safeguarding the region. What are your thoughts when it comes to networking and building that resilience amongst our partners?
Well, I think it's a devilishly hard problem, actually, because even in the United States, say pre 9/11, we had a hard enough time coordinating amongst ourselves, amongst, say, the different intelligence agencies, because the basic impulse of every government bureaucrat, and I'm speaking as a 35-year government bureaucrat, is to protect yourself first, right? So you create this piece of information, and the first thing that comes to you is, should I share it with other people? And the first question that comes up is, will that get me in trouble? Well, sharing it is more likely to get me in trouble than not sharing it. So the impulse is to give it the highest classification or the most restrictive caveat that's available to me, because that has the smallest chance of getting anyone in trouble. And of course, what we found out before 9/11 is that nobody was talking to anybody, and we couldn't put all the pieces together. Well, now take that into the international space. I mean, of course, I was in Australia for 3 years and constantly had Australian officers say, why are you guys classifying everything no foreign? Which means for us, of course, no foreigners allowed to see it, when we, Australia, are your Five Eyes partner. And the answer is because we are a nation of bureaucrats, or at least a government full of bureaucrats, and nobody wants to get in trouble. So that's what we do. And then take that the next step outside of the Five Eyes partners, and it gets really, really hard. So, I mean, I think a lot of it is just human nature, basic bureaucratic tendencies, makes it very hard to share information. And then I'll finally say, especially when you have a determined adversary or adversaries who really want that information and you don't want them to have it.
Yeah, and Matt, so if I can hand over to you, you've a distinguished career in the Navy and as an aviator. You've been on the front line. You've had to deal with lots of other organisations, be they allies in the region, to share information. How do you see, or where do you see the opportunities lying ahead, you know, when it comes to the battle network integration to really enhance that lateral transfer of and interoperability in the region?
Yeah, Todd, look, 20 years ago, we were really happy if we could just communicate with another nation via secure comms, right? We could get the code right and we could start talking. And that may take an hour to set up. And I think what you're seeing today, especially it's all brought to the forefront in Ukraine with the Russians. Battle is changing. How we conduct battle is changing almost by the minute. And if you don't have your battle network already established and you know exactly how it's going to go down, you're going to be in trouble, right? There is no time to make sure we got the codes right, or we have to be able to network. And I think, you know, Australia made some good calls when they put out their DSR this last year. You know, interoperable is no longer, I think, a key word. I think we need to be interchangeable, right? Which means we've got to be using the same technology. We've got to be linked at that technology, and we've got to be able to talk real time and pass information real time in order to really be successful.
Yep. And thanks, Matt. Pete, I'd like to hand over to you. Your expertise, obviously, as a technical expert in network architecture. You've built systems and rolled out systems for the defence organisations here in the US and also for commercial organisations. How do you see technology, or what steps need to be taken from a technological point of view to assist reaching these goals around interchangeable communication and operation?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. What I think is important is that we probably spent a couple of decades with encrypting networks, but less and less focus on encrypting the data. So under the construct of trust but verify, that doesn't seem to have prevailed in the data. So we've got secure comms and IPsec tunnels and black core networks and whatever we've got, but you can still transfer misinformation over a very secure network. And so we need to form a provenance around that data, so there's an opportunity to trust both the network and the data. There's lots of areas now, new vectors, such as space and other communications transports, non-terrestrial networks, that I think will increase the desire for that trust as we go forward with the data itself.
I might just add a couple of comments. I mean, for me, the environment that we see ourselves in now is one that's kind of changed from independence to interdependence, or reliance from self-reliance. And that's fundamentally changed, not just for Australia, but I think for all the countries in the region, including the US. The bottom line up front is none of us can do anything on our own anymore. So there's a much greater need for us to be able to collaborate across a whole range of things, including our data networks and so forth. I mean, the reality is that we're already in conflict, arguably, in two domains, that is space and cyber at the moment. And that's not just against one particular threat. There's a number of threats out there that our countries are respectively dealing with at the moment. That being the case, that's changed our thinking, I guess, collectively, but also our ability to be able to combat those threats. The days of being able to do it on our own are really gone. So this business of reliance versus self-reliance really sort of resonates particularly with me, and certainly in the military sphere I see it much more and more every day. This is where I think the forums such as AUKUS, but more particularly Quad at the moment, I think can help provide the mechanisms and the tools within which to address this sort of interdependence reliance requirements, and how we can get ourselves to a situation where we've got a way of being able to share and collaborate in dealing with this environment and the threats associated with our ability to prosecute our objectives respectively.
Actually, Paddy, if you wouldn't mind, because I think all of this is kind of building toward the question of, is there a platform across which to share information when it's not within a known grouping, right? So everybody in the Middle East, we got used to this thing, Centrix, which sort of gave us the ability to share on a common platform. But now we find ourselves with a need to be able to do a similar thing in a multitude of different places. So you just mentioned the Quad. There is no Quad network, right? There is no, while I was down in Australia, there was a desire to pull together a Five Eye plus France and Japan, but there was no network to share anything on, right? So if you had something that somebody decided, I'm going to classify this Five Eyes plus France and Japan, the only way to communicate it is to put it in an envelope and hand it to somebody. So, this goes back to, I think, Pete's point, which is, we've been very focused on setting up channels across which we can communicate among certain groupings, but we haven't figured out that next step, which is how do you make that dynamic and figure out, okay, this is who I want this to go to. I'm going to put it out on this common channel, and only these entities can pull from it.
Yeah, and look, and I agree entirely, Ray, and that's a good point. I guess the point I was alluding to was what can be that vehicle, which I guess is what you're referring to, within which to do that in this new space. I mean, we're operating in a region, in many respects, which is a series of bilaterals covered by some trilaterals, some multilaterals, some info sharing, Five Eyes types arrangements, and all the rest of it. And you're right. What can be that vehicle that can harness our collective efforts to be able to share and collaborate with each other? You're right, there is no answer, but the need is clearly more evident than it's been for a long time.
Well, it's a wicked problem, right? Because you've got so many disparate countries with different mechanisms by which they communicate, and by how secure they are, right? So the Quad, is okay with two of the members, right? But two of them, there's a lot more decision-making processes that goes in before they can agree to something, right? So, I think what we need to focus on first off is how do we pass that information between our closest allies, right? For AUKUS, Australia, UK, US, like that has to work. If that doesn't work, none of the other stuff matters, right? Because that's going to be essentially the largest or the strongest coalition that we have moving into a conflict, most likely. I think the Quad is going to be huge. India, Japan, both could be very potential allies. However, they've got their problems, right? And we've got to be able to get around that. And we need to be strong within the alliance, AUKUS. We have to be able to pass that information. And that's where we need to focus, I think, first. And then you can spread down the pyramid to figuring out, okay, who else do we bring in and what vehicle do we bring them in on? But it's got to be established between the strongest first, in my opinion.
And I think, Matt, if I may say, it needs to be designed before we end up on the battlefield. So we talk about things like defence industry having to communicate with each other, the government defence structures, in order to deliver materiel to defence the multi-forces, that's really important too, because they are an attack vector. And when you cross the barrier over to industry, even supply chain of things that are material for foodstuffs, industrial lubricants, whether that be, protective equipment, armor, all sorts of things get wrapped up in how to communicate that securely so that that isn't an attack vector to limit or suppress our intent to defend.
And I think, Pete, you mentioned it earlier, in many respects this comes down to trust. There are some challenges for each of us respectively with who we believe we can or can't completely trust with information that we want to share. And that's not limited to any one particular stakeholder, but for all of us in this environment where there's a much greater need to collaborate more widely and share information, it brings with it some increased challenges in terms of being able to guarantee through trust that the information that we're sharing is going to be held and used only as we would like it to be done so. And that's not easy. There's anecdotal evidence of various stakeholders and actors operating around the region in and amongst those who we engage with. So I don't know what the solution is, but we definitely, Ray's right, we need a solution, something which promotes and allows us to be able to share that information in an environment and in a wider community than we have in the past amongst stakeholders that we have historically not had such arrangements with. And that's not going to be easy, particularly with stakeholders who are under pressure themselves in their respective relationships with some of the key stakeholders in the region as well.
Well, gentlemen, it's obviously a topic that requires a lot more discussion from not only a political level but also senior bureaucratic level, and hopefully we can circle back on this with some insights, further insights and developments, in the coming months and years, because obviously it's very important to get this sorted for AUKUS, number one, but also to meet those goals that I think we all have in the region. Again, thanks to Paddy, Matt, Ray and Pete. Having access to the living library that these guests provide is an invaluable asset. This is the first episode of many, and we look forward to you joining us for the next episode. If you've enjoyed this content, please subscribe on your favourite podcasting platform.